Welcome to LCRL's Liberty Alert in Washington, D.C. with your host, Dr. Gregory Seltz. Talking two kingdom citizenship, bold biblical principles for a robust public Christian life. And now, your host, Dr. Gregory Seltz.
Hello, I'm Dr. Gregory Seltz. Welcome to this week's Liberty Alert, our Wednesday in Washington. And we're taking a deep dive again about being a two-kingdom citizen in the world today for the sake of the culture, as well as for the purpose of the mission of the church. And again, we know that this is a challenging time for the church's witness in the world. There are forces in culture that are actually in a more raw way coming up and rising up against the main message of the church. And that includes the gospel, but especially the moral message of the church. And again, the key for us as Christians is to realize that this is God's message. This is God's law. This is God's gospel. This is God's engagement of the world for the sake of the world. And so we're just trying to be faithful and useful in His hands for the sake of those He brings into our life and for the culture in which He plants us. So today, we're going to talk about the sanctity of life. Again, you know, there are four things we try to engage in Washington in terms of representing our church. And the first one is religious liberty, and we talk a lot about religious liberty. Sanctity of life is number two, because both of these can be defended, if you will, from for everybody, even for those with whom we disagree. And that's going to bring us to the issue of today. But then marriage. The institution of marriage and educational freedom, to us, these are religious liberty issues. We're just asking the culture in which we live to allow us to be the people of God and to serve others in His name on His terms and let the chips fall where they may. So today, the issue, the sanctity of life, defending children, especially children in the womb, mothers defending mothers, families for the sake of society, as well as for the sake of the individuals involved. And so we're going to talk about Dobbs versus Jackson. It might be time. Roe v. Wade, Roe v. Wade's time might be at hand. And what does that actually mean? But again, we ask the question that we always have to ask is, why is the sanctity of life so controversial? Did you know that the American culture is actually quite radical compared to the rest of the world in terms of abortion and abortion on demand? I mean, the notion that you can actually take the life of the unborn in some states in America all the way up to the 9th month and even beyond, even if the baby's born alive after the 9th month. In New York and in some states in our country, you can let the child die. Well, that doesn't happen in the rest of the world. In fact, in Europe, I think the end of legal abortion is like the 14th, maybe the 12th week. I can't remember exactly the time, but it's that early. So again, we're quite radical in some ways. And the question is, well, why is life and the sanctity of all life, which actually means that even with those with whom we disagree, we understand that there's a preciousness to life in general that we have to honor. Is pro-life? Is it pro-woman? Is it pro-child? Is it pro-men? Is it pro-family? Is it pro-science? Is it pro-community? All at the same time. Well, yes, it is actually. And isn't that a good thing? And so again, we'll finally even talk, is there really a villain? Who is it and who isn't it? And why does that matter? And what does this ultimately say about who we are as human beings? So again, we'll get right into that in just a minute. But thanks again for so much for your prayerful support. We had a church that honored us with a fairly large gift this week, and we're just so thankful because we really are here just to protect the church's public space in the world in which we live. We want our schools, we want our preschools, we want our churches and universities to be able to be to be able to speak the whole counsel of God and to be able to be faithful witnesses to what the Word of God teaches, both the moral teachings of the Word of God and, of course, the good news of the gospel. And so being in D.C. Towards that end is just merely telling the government to get back in its space, its proper place, and let us be the church for the sake of others. So thanks again for that kind of support. We are privileged to represent you in D.C. and also to be a support to those who work in D.C. If you do want to donate to us, you can go to lcrlfreedom.org. That's lcrlfreedom.org. And there's a button there where you can actually donate to us as well. So thanks again. Keep us in your prayers because we are here for you. Now, this week, one of the big things that happened is Senator Langford. I didn't think this was going to happen because I could see the Biden administration was really it was going radical on the pro-life and pro-abortion issue. And one of the things that I was worried about was the Hyde Amendment being kind of pushed out, and in the whole budget issue and the spending initiative, the infrastructure bill, they were putting all kinds of nonsense in there. And Langford was able to get an amendment in there that protected the unborn during the budget debate, and that was a good thing. In fact, this amendment ensured that the budget will comply with the Hyde Amendment. And remember, the Hyde Amendment just said, look, if you're going to have abortions, you cannot use public money for this. I mean, you should at least pay for it. First of all, we're talking about the destruction of human life in the womb. And then to actually say taxpayers should pay for that, that's crazy. And the Hyde Amendment actually was a bipartisan amendment that has been a long-standing thing on the Hill, and this administration was trying to get rid of the Hyde Amendment. So Langford was able to get this passed, and we'll see if it holds. And then there was a Weldon Amendment that protect healthcare workers who refuse to participate in abortion, from discrimination and from actually losing their jobs and those kinds of things. So that was a good thing that just happened legislatively. And but I want to talk a little bit broader than that today, because there is an issue that's going to be before us this next year, and we probably couldn't have even imagined this happening just a few years ago. But because the courts have changed, because some things, there's been a lot of hard work going on this since 1973, when Roe v. Wade just literally was hoisted upon the culture. In fact, the culture was pro-life. There was no movement in the culture towards Roe v. Wade. It just was hoisted on the culture by judicial fiat, and that's really one of the big issues today. Is should the courts? That's not the court's job. It should be a legislative thing, not a judicial thing. But we're going to take a little bit broader look at this today, because the court has decided to hear a case, and it's the Mississippi case, Dobbs versus Jackson. And, Roe v. Wade's time may be at hand, because what they're looking at is whether or not Mississippi can actually say you can't have abortions before the 15th week. And there's been a couple ways that the courts have been dealing with this, or that the lawyers have been presenting their case. One of them is that abortion is one of those things that like a civil rights kind of thing, and the fact that there's a lot more abortions of people of color, rather than Anglos and stuff like that, working at that direction. But then the other one is just the fundamental issue: is this a child? And if this is a child, how can you terminate a child? What right do people have to do that to another person? In fact, what's really interesting is the argument that I've been kind of reading about the Dobbs case is that, people talk about the age of viability. And remember, typically speaking, the government usually is protecting the most vulnerable. That's when you ask for the government to get involved. If somebody can take care of themselves, we don't want the government involved in that kind of stuff. We say, no, people should be able to take care of their own business. But in the abortion debate, we have this kind of cockeyed view that the less viable a child is in the womb, the state can then sanction its termination. And it's just a strange way of thinking about this, because that is exactly the opposite of how a healthy, humane state should function. If something is more vulnerable, that's where you often plead to the state that the state would actually interject its power to protect. So in Dobbs versus Jackson, Mississippi, and it's going kind of out on a limb here. It's calling the question, if you will. Now, what's interesting is right off the bat, 240 female scholars, professionals, and pro-life feminist organizations filed an amicus brief, and on this particular debate. And on this particular case, and this petition actually seeks to reject the feminist trope that women need to have access to abortion in order to enjoy a successful and rewarding life. And so, in this age of technology, all the capability, possibilities, this notion that women are somehow, that it's a fait accompli, that they have no control over their lives as it is, that abortion is a necessary thing. They're going after that, and they said this in this amicus brief. We reject and these are women arguing this, and some of the pro-life feminist women on top of that. We reject the argument that the ability of women to participate equally in the economic and social life of the nation requires the availability of abortion. So that's kind of where this case is, which is going to be in front of the Supreme Court, and I think it'll be ruled on by next June. This is a huge thing, and the court actually wants to hear this case, and it wants to get to the fundamental argument. And so the question is going to be, science says, it's pro-science to say that a baby is a child from the moment of conception till its natural birth. It is a human being. That is scientifically a fact. And so if you're one of these folks who says, follow the science, well, there's the science. And so again, the question finally has to do with, well, if the baby is domicile in a woman's uterus, why does it lose its rights if it actually has, it's merely part of a woman's body, and it has its own autonomy, relatively speaking. And then the question is, if viability is the issue, well, children can't live outside the womb on their own for a long time either. Should they be able to be terminated outside of the womb? You could actually go at this argument a lot of different ways in terms of its legalities. You could say, well, if a baby it shouldn't be aborted 1 day before it's born in the 9th month, what about 270 days? And what about when the heart starts beating? A lot of people don't realize the heart beats in the first trimester, in the first 20 days. A lot of times you don't even know you're pregnant yet, and the heart is already beating. Babies feel pain in the womb. All kinds of issues like this. And then the whole notion that there are some states now that allow abortion all the way till the end of the 9th month. Now that itself is something that's crazy. So, again, when we start to talk about these things, the Roe v. Wade case was flawed because it's just bad law. It's not a constitutional issue. There is no right to eliminate a child in the Constitution. In fact, the Constitution, if you really look at it on its face, would be to protect individuals before such an act by any individual or even by the government itself to terminate vulnerable life. And so really what will happen, if people ask, well then what's going to happen after Roe v. Wade? Well, what's going to happen is then it'll go back where it should have gone, which is to the legislatures and to the states, where dialogue again will begin again, and people will have their say. This is not what the court should be doing. So, there are pro-choice people and pro-abortion people who actually realize this is just bad law. The Supreme Court should not have ruled in this way because it's not a constitutional issue; it's a legislative issue. And and our argument is the judges don't determine the preciousness of life. They don't determine the morality of the fundamentals of life. There are things that are above us and beyond us. There are unalienable rights that we have that the government doesn't have a right to rule on. And the right to life is ultimately one of those things. And I'm going to tell you right now, if the right to life gives way and the sanctity of life ever gives way, then all this political stuff will be meaningless because we'll be a barbaric people. So again, as you start to struggle with this, life begins at conception. Follow the science, start there, and then deal with the ramifications of what it means, in terms of the life of the mother or the life of the family or the life of the life of the child, and try to be humane, caring, and loving in that context. So again, when you start to talk about, we're the only country in the world that allows elective abortion throughout the entire months of a child's gestation. That's crazy. And France, Italy, Germany, Spain, Norway, Switzerland, long list of European countries. They got that gestational limit. Yeah, it's 14 weeks or earlier. That's a hard stop. So that just shows, when you talk about why is this stuff so controversial, it's because there is an extremism going on in our culture today, and that extremism is taking advantage of the vulnerability of the child in the womb. So when I ask that question, is sanctity of life controversial? Is saying that life has purpose and life has dignity, and even those with whom we disagree, we've got to honor the fact that they're human beings, and we have to treat people humanely and civilly, and we have to even protect life even when we're not always in agreement with what's going on in the lives of other folks. That's not, I don't understand why that should be controversial. Really, it's the libertinism that's controversial in our world today, where we're sexualizing our children so early on. We're teaching them that sex has no consequences, and then basically when people have children when they are not married, or when they have children when they don't have jobs, or when they can't provide, instead of actually saying, well, maybe we should actually talk about sexuality different and the practices of sexuality different. No, we say abortion's the solution, and it's not, because it hurts women. It actually is a very chauvinist thing. I've talked to some folks on the Hill who are fighting this, and I said, I don't understand why I want men to rise up to be the kind of fathers and husbands that they are called to be. I think, chivalry and modesty and those kind of things are still valuable. Commitment in marriage, those things are huge, and our culture needs to get back to, a focus on these things. And I don't understand why the feminist groups get away with calling abortion a pro-women thing, because it's really a chauvinist thing. Because when you think about the fact that you really are telling men all they got to do is pay for I guess it's $250 or something like that. It might be more now, I don't know. But I remember that number back in the day. And most men are taught now that they have no responsibility to the child, that the child is purely, having the child is purely the decision of the woman. And the man, if he wants to give her all her possibilities, he throws a little bit of money her way and then he just leaves. I just don't see how that kind of view of masculinity is helpful. And to me, it puts the woman even more at risk to face all these things alone. So, wow, why would we ever agree to such a thing, So to me, libertinism's the thing that's got to answer for these things. I mean, we've got STDs, we've got broken families, and now we have abortion on demand as the supposed solution. That's a result of sexual libertinism that was hoisted on our culture in the 1960s. And abortion in 1973 was supposed to be a solution. It's just magnified the problem as far as I can see. So, eliminating the child doesn't help. That's not the solution. So our culture, in fact, if you look at it, I was reading an article on this, and it said that our culture and political experience following Roe has shown that if you impose laws like Roe v. Wade at the federal level from the top down, it creates chaos, dissension, and it's one of those things where these things are best dealt with more locally. They're not best dealt with federally. They're best dealt with in the community. Churches need to rise up to the challenge of dealing with folks who have a pregnancy when they're in a pregnancy that is like a crisis situation. That's where love and support and all the kinds of things that enter in to honor and to challenge and to direct the lives of the mother and the father and the child. It's best when those things are done close to home, in community, in families, and things of that nature. And so, the quote that James Davison Hunter suggested in his book before the shooting begins, he said, the best way to deal with this is locally, regionally, and in states. He said democracy flourishes in small scale settings. In such settings, local institutions and elites can play a genuinely mediating role, for there's, by virtue of the circumstances of the collective life, accountability to each other and to others, and also, I would say, real mercy, in such a way where people pay the price for being loving to one another and to those in need. So, I think one of the things that I've noticed too is that the pro-life movement has taken all these caricatures on. They were called all kinds of names, and they were demonized for many, many years. And it's been a very positive movement. Pro-life is pro-woman, it's pro-marriage, it's pro husband and pro-man, it's pro-science, it's pro-society, and of course it's pro-unborn child. And when you put all those pros together, it's not to say that there are not challenges involved in that. But again, struggling to live virtuously in view of all those things, what a way to go, and what a society upon which to build. And we need to start to see that more. In fact, one of the ways that the pro-life movement's been doing a great job, not just by taking back the narrative, we were never even allowed to be called pro-life. We were constantly in newspaper articles, and some of it still today, called pro-abortion activists. And that's not who we were. We were pro-life activists, and that life had to do with the unborn. It had to do with the dignity of life lived in, as we grew, and also the dignity of life towards the end of our life. All that's a pro-life perspective, where life is something bigger than just our choices, because there's a God who grants us life and salvation. And so one of the best ways to really get this argument across to people, especially people who are pregnant, is in the prenatal stuff, when you start to actually see that child in the womb. And I know there's a movie out, I can't remember the organization right now, but it's called Baby Olivia. I'm going to look it up after we're done, and I'll see if I can post a link. But again, it's showing the child. And they always say, if the girl or the woman who sees that child and feels the support of their family, or especially the support of the guy that actually got her pregnant, and he owns that responsibility too, abortion becomes something that is not just unwanted, it becomes something that is unimaginable, because we see that life, that it's not just some cells in our bodies. So again, there are some threats to the stuff that we're dealing with today. So this Dobbs issue, if it does actually overturn Roe v. Wade, I think the real work is going to begin anew, and it's going to be a matter of dialoguing and serving one another, and actually starting to realize that these things are best done by free people seeking to be faithful to God and faithful to one another. And there are caricatures and demonizations of the pro-life movement even to this day, and they're wrong, because it's one of the most positive movements in our culture today, and I've been a part of it now for over 30 years, and I've always seen humility, I've always seen a diligence, a perseverance, a love for those who are dealing with the ramifications of sexuality, when they're not taught, that there are consequences to our decisions, and by the way, pregnancy it should not be a consequence. It should be something we aspire to when we talk about building families and having children and things like that. So we got to take these demonizations head on, because they're again caricatures of our view, and again, pro-life is a positive way of looking at your life. If you're someone who's struggling with pregnancy right now, your life matters, and the life of your child matters, and there are people who care about you even now, and that's the framework within which to work through some of these issues. And so we've got two things that as the church we've got to rise to. One is we have to defend life, because life is a fundamental value. It's one of those fundamental values that if it gives way, all of these other things we talk about are somewhat meaningless if we don't cherish life. But not just defend, but then offer. offer a different way of life, rise to that, continue to undergird families and try to promote families and incentivize families, and try to be a culture of family, a culture that actually cares for one another and looks out for one another, especially those who get in situations where they feel alone and they feel a need. Contend for the issue of life as a fundamental truth in life, yes, but then also work hard to find ways to serve, whether it's single mothers, whether it's young people who are struggling, early on in their marriages or things like that with their children. The goal is for the community and for the family, the extended family, to try to again be the solution to the challenges that life brings to all of us. And so we've got to engage this issue because our culture depends on this. To be a humane culture, it comes down to life itself. Mother Teresa said, she actually accused us when she was here, of being a culture of death, of looking at death as if it's the solution to our issues. And we should be those who look at life, even the struggles that it entails. Now, what's interesting is the question is there a villain in this? And I would say, one of the things, back in the day, we served, my wife and I served in New York with Cardinal O'Connor, the Catholic Church, the pro-life clinics. And the big difference between the pro-life clinics, and there's a lot of them now. I didn't realize there's so many. There's more pro-life clinics in America today than there are pro-abortion clinics. I don't know if you knew that. I just kind of found that out. And but the pro-life clinics, what makes them different is that, A, they don't make a dime off of what they do. They're there to help. They're there actually trying to bring resources to those who are suddenly pregnant and they didn't, they were hoping that they weren't, et cetera, and then they come in and a lot of these pro-life clinics now are not only they're doing prenatal care and they're trying to help the woman or help the family or help the boyfriend and girlfriend to deal with these things and try to come to grips with what's the right way forward. Some of them actually will wind up even resourcing the woman all the way throughout her pregnancy and whether she gives the child up for adoption or not. I mean, that's what happened in our work in New York, is that the Catholic Church committed, with Cardinal O'Connor and the Catholic Church in the diocese there, that if any woman came in and would bring the child to term, that they would find a way to support her in that endeavor, no matter what. And so again, when you start to think about these kind of things, the question is there a villain? And the answer is yes, there is a villain. Planned Parenthood, because Planned Parenthood has convinced our girls and our women and our wives, as well as the men who abdicate their responsibility, it's convinced them that abortion is the solution to their liberty and really to their libertinism, and they're making money off this. And abortion, there is no, it's not a victimless crime because it hurts women. It hurts, obviously, it eliminates the child. It hurts even the men who abdicate their responsibility because that's actually a caricature of what a man should be. But when you start to look at these things, can you imagine? They're making money off of eliminating children. They're making money off of selling baby parts, and they're making money off of drawing people into this kind of lifestyle that is risky in terms of its sexual practice. And then instead of taking responsibility for the fact that life is meant to be created ultimately, sex is for enjoyment, but it's also for procreation. Society depends on that. And these guys are making money off the termination of that way of thinking about life itself. And when you can even call pregnancy she was treated for pregnancy. I heard that in a movie, like it was a disease. Well, that's a modern invention because that's not how people down through time have looked at family and children and pregnancy and all those different things. We created that notion. And the people who created that notion are making money off the fears and the struggles of people. They're making money off the actual act of abortion and keeping people dependent on abortion as if it's the solution to intimacy, to healthy marriages, to community, and to families, when it's actually the problem. So when we talk about going forward on this kind of stuff, this really is a question about what is our humanity, and so this issue is going to come up. I think the courts, eventually are going to kick this back. That doesn't mean it's going to solve the issue. In fact, Roe did not solve it either. It just compounded the problem. It hoisted a decision on a country that was basically pro-life at the time. It hoisted a decision on them, and then it made it constitutional, which meant that it made any kind of dialogue illegal in many ways, or at least unwanted. Well, no, we need dialogue on this. We need to learn many different ways to deal with these issues so that we can be the kind of people that God wants us to be. Humane, civil, those who are committed, men committed to women, women committed to men, families committed to children. Those are the building blocks of a healthy society, and Roe v. Wade undermines all of that. So, again, when it's all said and done, if you're going to engage this issue with folks, again, have a biblical context for this. This is ultimately about human beings being in the image of God, and what does it mean when we're talking about the most vulnerable human beings in our lives, and that's the child in the womb. And then, of course, what does it mean for the woman who's vulnerable when she has a pregnancy, when the boyfriend or the husband is not fulfilling his duties? What does all that mean? And the answer is we should serve one another the way God in Christ serves us. Make sure that people understand the data. Folks, even in church, there are people who've been convinced that abortion is the solution. I didn't realize this, but they say the statistics are 1 in 4 people, even in church, are having abortions. And then the person who has one abortion generally will have another one, because it's usually a 45% or 50% return to that. Because when you're desperate and you give yourself the ability to make what would be the wrong decision, it's easier to make that decision again the next time. But the guilt doesn't go away. The struggles don't go away. Even this abortion pill that's now kind of, in the pandemic, they were actually doling out abortion pills without a prescription. It caused a lot of pain in the lives of our young women and our women. And again, there is an industry behind this. There are people making money off that, and they are the villains. Because in that sense, I think they're actually... They keep claiming that this is a pro-woman thing when it's exactly the opposite of that. This kind of stuff, have a biblical context for this thing when you talk about it, image of God, purpose of life, and then understand that that a pro-abortion culture undermines family, it undermines relationship, it does undermine community, and we want to take all those back too. And then finally, when you talk about, how do we deal with this, this is a personal thing. We've got to get involved in these things. We've got to get involved in these things with the people that we love. If a child's out of wedlock, that doesn't mean that the child is not to be loved. That doesn't mean that the relationship cannot be fostered. It means that we have work to do to honor the mother, honor the child, honor the husband, the father, because he's got a relationship to that child too, and that child needs those parents if it's going to grow up in a healthy way too. And so making this part of our own commitment in our churches, in our families, will go a long way in actually making Roe v. Wade something we don't think about once it's in the rearview mirror. And how do we change this kind of stuff? Again, folks, we're all broken healers. We all have struggles. We've all been made wrong choices in our life, but we're all called to see what God can do when our brokenness is brought to Him. So we have to help people, as someone said to me, get on the pro-life highway, because many people don't know how to get on it, and they don't realize what a joyful thing it is to live a purposeful life in Christ with the image of God as your view of yourself, with the providence of God as the promise of God in your life, and with a purposeful life that was not just meant for you, but it was meant to be shared with your husband, your wife, your child, your friends, those kind of things. So again, life's decisions need life support, and we can be part of that, and we need to be a part of the creation of the culture of life, especially if Roe v. Wade is something that is overturned with the Dobbs case that the Supreme Court will be looking at this year. So if that doesn't happen, if Roe v. Wade is not overturned, or even if it is, it doesn't mean that the abortion debate is over, because there's 20 pro-choice or pro-abortion states. There's about 30 pro-life states, if you will. And so access to abortion is still going to be an issue. There's still going to be plenty of states. In fact, like I said, the New York rule where a child could be aborted up to and through the 9th month, that's barbaric. And yet they lit up the Freedom Tower pink in celebration, and they kind of danced and cheered. I don't think that's something we should be cheering about. And even if you're a pro-choice person, I don't see how you cheer being able to empower doctors to take life at that stage. I can't even imagine it. I can't even imagine it. But again, those are the kind of things that are going to be debated, because this is going to be an issue about, is that a child in the womb? And if it is, then shouldn't the state protect that which is most vulnerable? And then if that still challenges the autonomy and the ability for a woman to live a fruitful life, then there should be those who rise up to be a support and to value her life too, and also to value, again, what family means and what all that means for the sake of our culture. That's what we're up against. That's what's coming this next year. So I wanted to be looking forward to us talking more about the Dobbs case, especially when arguments are made before the Supreme Court, and wanted to make sure that you were aware of that, because it could be a huge decision that finally unravels what I think was probably the most egregious abuse of the Supreme Court since Dred Scott. And it just violated all the constitutional limitations of the court, and it took it out of the realm of the people, which is where it belongs. All right, and so again, till we see him face to face, speak the truth in love with humility and grace, be wise as serpents and harmless as doves. Until next time, God richly bless you. I'm Gregory Seltz. Have a great day.